Welcome to the ELR. This chapter, we discussed sustainable and ethical design practices. At diegoNMTZ, we empower organizations and leaders with a comprehensive suite of thought leadership services. Our agency specializes in content creation, program management, community building, and content marketing, all designed to amplify leadership impact across product, engineering, and design. We transform visions into powerful narratives that engage and resonate with target audiences. Okay, hola everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Ecosystem Leadership Report Design 2024 panel series. This conversation is a part of a broader initiative aimed at exploring how leaders are shaping the future of the design industry, driving innovation, and leading the ecosystem of leadership, technology, and collaboration. As the sponsor of these reports, and today's panels, diegoNMTZ, is like super proud to support conversation that brings leaders together to share insights, experiences. That's really important. I like hearing anecdotes, hearing numbers, hearing examples, hearing how they did it in their companies and their organizations. So this ELR Design 2024 is a part of a series that also covers leadership in product and engineering. So if you have product leaders in your company, please make an intro so we can continue creating this amazing platform for all of you to say whatever you want and to share all the knowledge that you want to share. And maybe you cannot because you don't work in the most famous company ever. Like you don't work at Google, you are still doing fine. Don't worry. So today's topic is sustainable and ethical design practices. I know it's complex. I know that some of you might say like, hey, sustainability and ethics in business and design, it's something that it's really complex. It's really hard to define because we can see some companies that have dark patterns, that are doing things in the dark, that go beyond design and experience. So I'm really, really happy to have these four friends that I've met this year. And the first one is Max Speicher. He's the director of product design at Best Secret Group. You might have heard of him because he's in the report and he shared a ton of numbers, a ton of things that he's doing at his company at the moment successfully from his design leadership position. Then we have Nikos Karolauni. He is a fantastic person. It's really, really important for me to say that he's Greek because that means we are bringing people from all over the world in this really, really, really diverse panel. Don't let your eyes betray you. This is really diverse and interesting. So I can see some laughs. So welcome. We have Nick Edel, Senior Principal Design and Innovation at Infosys Consulting. Can you show us your threads, Nick, please? Just do this for a second so we can see that.
Look, tied back and hidden self look respectable.
And we have Stefan Klambaneva, Manager Director at Park. And welcome, guys. So if people want to know more about you, all the details are on the Eventbrite. And I want to use the time of this session. I already used 3 minutes. And I will start with the first question. And all of these questions for the audience are based on the report. If you don't have it, I will share the link later. The first question and the first quote that I want to share is from one of the panelists, which is Max Speicher. And it says, we designed to not just for that e-commerce shop, so we could reduce returns in certain cases by 2.6%, which is massive. Can you tell us more about the context of this decision you made, Max, please?
Yeah, that was actually...
And welcome to the panel.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. Glad to be here. The initiative that you're referring to was basically a project for an e-commerce company that I did in a consulting function together with my partner. And what we did there was, so the overarching goal of the larger initiative was to look into how returns could be reduced, which is a really nice use case because reducing returns means more money for the business, but it also means less CO2 footprint of parcels being sent around the world. And what we employed was really a relatively simple nudging technique. So we did online experiments with different combinations of nudges. And the winning combination in the end was just a really relatively simple message in the cards informing users about a parcel had this and that carbon footprint causes so much CO2 equivalents, and then on the order confirmation page. And then we said, then because of this, please choose your sizes and colors carefully if you're ordering the garments, right? Be conscious about that. And then on the order confirmation page, we also displayed a little survey where people say on a scale from 1 to 10, I want to contribute to reducing returns to help the environment. And that experiment really turned out to reduce the returns made by customers by 2.6%, which was, given the size of the company that I can't disclose, but it was a massive impact business-wise and also in terms of metric tons of carbon saved. So we had less returns with no impact on revenue. That was, of course, the important thing that then, drove the point on.
Yes, and just for context, Best Secret Group, it's like a giant in the e-commerce fashion industry in Europe. It might not be the super famous like Zara or any other company, but it's enormous, and 2.6% of reduced returns, it's massive. And anyone that works at e-commerce knows that. So next question is, this complex balance, I know I don't want to hear any response that says it's a balance or it depends. So I will go with Nikos because Nikos has strong opinions, and it's aligning sustainability with profitability. So how did you balance long-term sustainability goals with short-term business demands for profitability and speed? Like, do you have any example about this?
It depends. Look, and actually, just on Max's point earlier, that's a really good example whereby also at the same time I assume you educated in a way end customers as to how they can impact or they can reduce the environmental impact of through their choices. And you mentioned it was retail, and another example I have, it's Askedin. I think it's a Swedish company where they had the full traceability of all the clothes that they're selling. And also when you buy something, they give you a sustainability receipt that tracks the item all the way from production to getting to your home. But when it comes to enabling customers and making them aware of the impact of their decisions, I see in the future something like the energy performance that all white goods have. So if you buy a washing machine, it has a little sticker on from A to G, I think. We need that for digital products. And I think we're going to that direction. And you could say this website, under normal conditions, it emits this much of CO2. So, and then which side is greener or not, but also to enable users and customers to make their own more sustainable choices, even though it's very, very hard to calculate end user emissions. We may discuss that later. But to your point, Diego, about balancing short and long-term goals, sustainable goals and profitability. And I'll say that we may not always be able to do that. Okay, to be absolutely clear, because the way I see it is that we have no choice but to start to behave more sustainably in our industry when building digital products and services. When it takes about 14,000 liters of water to make one smartphone, and we change it every couple of years. Okay, that we have a problem there. And especially in the industry we are, it's estimated that about only 5% of all data collected is managed after 3 months after collection. Okay, that's a lot of waste. And the data we collect doubles every year. And recently I read that we're projected to run out of physical space to save, to store our data. That is a problem. Okay, so it could be simply initiatives like the right to repair that reduces the need to update our phones every couple of years. So, and for me, it's about a lot of digital products and digital services, and companies that run those services and products will need to change the business model. What used to work 10, 15 years ago will not work anymore. So yes, we should always look at how can we balance sustainability with profit, but that may not always be possible, and we need to make some choices. Are we here to build something that lasts? Are we here for short-term gains? I know I haven't answered really. It's still a sort of it depends, but to me it's becoming more and more obvious that we need to change the way we work and the business models.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Stefan, you work with a ton of companies, well, with a ton of design leaders from different companies, and in the US and Europe, I think primarily. But what Stefan and Nico shared about education, I know it's really, really important, but what is the education that your stakeholders are doing and your own team needs to learn about sustainability, not just waste, but also like design systems? I believe they are like an amazing way of reducing digital waste, reducing energy consumption, reducing work. Work, that's an ethical impact we have. So my question is, what kind of education the team needs or asks for? What kind of education the business asks from you and from your team? And what is the education you want to give to your team and the companies you work with?
Well, great question, Diego. I could probably talk for hours on that topic, but I'll try to keep it brief. First of all, the biggest challenge we have with people and companies, which is common, is where to start. And the biggest challenge, I think the easiest thing to begin with today, because it's an easy way to kind of comprehend, and you can dive as deep as you want, is to start with the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. What we do at Park, and what I've been doing actually even before I joined Park, is to since 2015 we've had this framework, and hopefully everybody on the call today and our participants all know what the UN Sustainable Development Goals are, right? They first came out in 2015 out of some work that was done. And what I think that we should be doing is try to identify which of those 17 closely align with our personal ethos, our beliefs. And when it comes to companies, what are the key areas that they focus on? So if you're in, let's say, hospitality, wellness is a key one, right? Number 4. If you're looking at business, if you're in the business of IT, for example, and if you're in supply chain, there's, looking at how can you change your linear circular business model, your linear business models from today into circular business models, right? So it's not about eliminating waste. It's about, or recycling. It's about getting, transforming what used to be something that you started with a resource and then you ended up throwing it in the garbage, to upcycling that thing or taking it back and reintroducing it into your production system, your supply chain, right? So there's a great example, specifically Novo Nordisk, for example, collaborated, and this is not my company, so I'm giving you a case study from another organization, collaborated with Matter, a design agency, to take the waste products from injections for testing people that have diabetes, and they took another waste stream from a local brewery where they had a bunch of peat from making beer. They combined those two things together and they made furniture out of it. So they actually upcycled 2 waste streams that normally would go into the garbage into a new product that actually was worth a lot more because it's well designed and it's taking 2 waste streams and turning it into something new, right? And there's a lot of things that we could be doing like that to transform our organization. So where do we start? Simple. UN SDGs. Then you can start to think about what are your business models that you're looking at today, and how can you transform those linear ones with a small pilot, so don't bite off more than you can chew, but to prove that you can incorporate that waste stream back into the product, or do what Deso is doing. Deso is a small family-owned company, and they made carpeting, floor products, right? And so they had a bunch of products, but they decided to streamline those product lines into ones that were only sustainable. So instead of having, let's say, 100 SKUs, they whittled them down to the ones that they could continue to sell using the 80-20 rule. 80% of your clients typically buy 20% of the products, right? And they kept everything on their P&L sheet. So basically, even though they sold it to their clients, they ended up keeping that product line as part of their inventory, even if it was sitting at the customer on site for 20, 30 years. So then they were responsible for taking it back and incorporating back in, right? So just a couple examples, I can go on, but I'll stop there.
Can I jump in, Stefan? You're absolutely right with the SDGs. We've looked at that, and I made a note. It was 6, 7, and 12 that we felt was relevant. Clean water, affordable and clean energy, and responsible consumption and production. It's a great place to start, absolutely. And also what we looked at is embodied carbon and operational carbon. We all spend time building stuff. We consume energy in building the thing. We found a way of calculating the energy we emit by being on call, by traveling, by doing the things that we do to be able to build something. So we're trying to create a benchmark. So we're trying all projects to aim for a specific number. So the embodied carbon is reduced, but a lot of it is in the operational carbon. And another thing that people may find useful, we're asking everyone to take the Green Software for Practitioners training, free online, basic information, gets everyone to a common sort of give a common understanding of sustainability and emissions. Sorry for jumping in.
No, Nico, that's perfect. I think
That's fantastic.
it actually
Yes.
rounds off my point very well, because I was just going to end with the fact that because I come from innovation and design, I worked a decade at IBM, another decade at Dassault Systems, a software company, right? We were very much in this sort of thick of things. Is how do you create tools that can support this as well? So there's LCA tools, there's tools that can capture, identify and model carbon emissions and all this good stuff, right? But there's also these, to kind of close the loop on the SDGs, is there's also SDGs that have been identified by the World Design Organization that are particularly relevant to the design community. So I wanted to make sure that I ended with those as well. I put them in the chat. They're 3, 6, 7, 9, 11, 12, and 17. And there's a link in there at the bottom for folks that want to find out more.
Thank you so much for that. I will take a step back, and it's amazing that you were sharing that, but I want to step back a little, a lot. And I want to ask this to Nick, because when we chat last time, we spoke about family and your children, and you said like, hey, I want to start making a bigger impact, to be more thoughtful on how I'm working. And my question is like, what is the motivation of a company beyond the compliance? And I think that's one of the terms in the report, like beyond compliance, because sometimes it sounds like, yes, we need to follow these rules and this rule and this rule and this rule, and that's okay, right? But is there anything beyond that, Nick?
I think it depends on the leadership, to be totally honest with you. We were chatting just before we joined. I suspect we're in a meaner, darker, more ruthless world now than we were a few years ago. And I think that presents challenges, particularly in organizations. And that's partly to do with, for example, the geopolitics that we face. And it's partly to do with a lack of aligned regulation. So look, for example, at the massive growth of AI, right? So you've got the EU AI Act, which is sort of trying to, implement, transparency and accountability and all these really, really crucial things. However, if there are large AI models, and I'm thinking particularly about, ones, for example, run by the Chinese government, ones run by the Russian government, that don't have these regulations, then we have the kind of an unfair playing field. And I think we see that in business now in a way we didn't 4 or 5 years ago. So Diego, you know this because we chatted before. I work for one of the big consulting companies, and my main client over the last few years has been one of the big global energy companies. Now, interestingly, I didn't choose to go into energy. Energy kind of like has a weird habit of choosing you, and it gets its fingers in you, and you kind of stay there. 5 years ago, so I mean, coincidentally, around the time of the beginning of the pandemic, we had a very visionary chief exec, and we were running a innovation center of excellence, and we genuinely felt we were working towards a really positive energy transition, and that was a really, frankly, it was a very nice thing to do for the sake of, like, going to work and feeling as though you're making a difference. In the 5 years, we've had, like, a bunch of very brutal wars. We've obviously had the pandemic. We've got political unrest in all sorts of situations. And I think that what we found within business is that now actually business priorities are different. They are meaner, and they are uglier, and they are about profit. And so now we have this really kind of aggressive squeeze on things. And so what I suspect has been squeezed out are these principles, these kind of fundamental, I'm here to do the right thing. And I suspect if you listen to the work of sort of various respected organizations, a lot of this comes down to do with ultimately systemic challenges. So if it is a private, if it is a listed company, right, the legally bound, though, the people that run the board of your listed company maximize profits for shareholders. That is what they are legally bound to do. There is no social enterprise obligation on the boards of the big global corporations. So yeah, they might, if you have a charismatic chief exec, then yeah, by all means he'll want to, like, set net zero targets early or whatever. But actually, when it comes down to it, obligated, all they're there to do is to make profit. And so we end up with this really kind of challenging paradox within the organization. And you're right, Diego. My motivations are quite personal, right? I'm 51 years old, so I'm definitely on the home stretch. I have a couple of kids, and when I'm sure when I'm about to meet my maker, I'm not going to be thinking how much money I made. Hopefully, I'm going to be sort of worrying about some slightly more important things than the number of zeros that ended up on my bank account, or how big my house was. So my personal motivations are quite passionate. I was talking to a client yesterday about the ethics of the use of AI, and within the responsible AI space, a lot of it is to do with compliance, and ultimately it's to do with risk, right? So crudely speaking, you've got a bunch of regulations in the UK and Europe and elsewhere, and there's enormous risks, 7% of global turnover, 3% of global turnover. And so it becomes about risk mitigation through compliance. And my point to my client was, yeah, but that's all very well and good, but surely there's got to come a point where it's about doing the right thing simply for the sake of doing the right thing. And that's a really interesting point because that brings in morals and ethics into business decisions, and they're not always the most comfortable partners. And we make expectations on our colleagues. I assume you feel the same about this than I do, and then actually you find that they don't, and that your colleagues are quite happy to work for tobacco companies, or I'm going to watch what I say here for obvious reasons, but we all have worked or work for big corporates. We all find that this conflict between profit and doing the right thing. I do suspect, though, it is a fundamentally systemic challenge. So Extinction Rebellion, who and not a perfect organization by any manner of means, and I work for energy companies, so I acknowledge the contradiction here. But one of the really interesting things that Extinction Rebellion said was that they actually tried to take the responsibility away from the individual. So I can recycle or I won't, but it's not going to make any difference really to the future of humanity. If we can fundamentally change the systems in which we work, and so let's say the chief execs of companies aren't just there to make profit, then we have a chance of changing the system. And I'll give you one more example before I stop. So in the UK, I've been doing some work recently with a different energy company about smart cities. Really, really interesting stuff. In the UK, the price of electricity is pegged to the price of production from fossil fuels. So the price of your kilowatt hour, or whatever the unit of measurement is, comes from the price of producing that from coal or oil or gas. Now, the cost of production from renewable is substantially cheaper, but the people that are making the renewable energy have to sell at the price pegged by the fossil fuels. So all of a sudden you take away the incentive for, so as a consumer, what I'd love to be able to say, I consume green electricity. And I would love to also, frankly, pay less, because if I'm paying less and doing good, then it's an absolute no-brainer as a consumer decision. But the system works against me. The system does not allow me to choose green electricity that costs less. So there is a classic systemic paradox that means that we're not set up to do the right thing. So I'm all for personal choice, and I'm all for empowered consumers. But actually, I think that we have to look on a systemic level, identify the paradoxes in company wants to do right, but it has to make profit. I want to buy green electricity, but it's not going to be any cheaper. So we're riddled with systemic paradoxes that I think kind of tie both arms behind our back and make it very, very difficult for passionate individuals to make any difference.
Okay, Nick,
ESG
thank you so much.
reporting is coming in, Nick. Sorry, ESG reporting is coming in Europe and the States. So companies will now be legally obligated to report on ESG. Now, there's different standards. That's a different story. Too many standards, but they'll be legally obligated to do that. And to the audience, here on this call, it may be that people may think I'm in a small company, 100 people. I may not be legally obliged to report, but everyone may be someone else's scope 3. And someone else may need to report, and you need to provide them all the numbers for them to report. So it's happening. It is happening.
It is, but we end up with what I pinged you guys before, the Brussels effect, right? So the Brussels effect is a kind of well-established thing that, crudely speaking, the EU at least start the process off themselves and then have a habit of getting stuck when it comes to ratification. But that's a different conversation we could talk about for hours. But again, if you look at the global, and I struggle to not be a bit depressed about this, because you look at the global situation, right? The incoming US president is almost bound to remove all the environmental protections that his predecessor put in place, because he's a renowned environmental skeptic, right? So then you're going to have, the US, Russia, China, and a bunch of other massive producers with little. I mean, here's the beautiful irony. It looks as though China will produce the most green technology, more than the rest of the world put together, and will probably have the lowest emissions. But, there you go.
Okay, guys, thank you so much.
Can I briefly add to that?
Yeah.
Just from a slightly different perspective, because we need systemic change, and I've just read Mike Montero's Ruined by Design, fantastic book. So it's all true what you're saying. On the plus side, a thing that I've been seeing over the past 10 years of doing user and customer research in different businesses is, even though we need the systemic change, a very positive thing that I've seen is that customers are actively asking for more sustainable solutions, right? And it pops up in customer feedback, and it pops up in user research, and people are asking for labeling of sustainable solutions, and they want to have more of this information. And while companies are all about profit still, and in the system that we currently have, they are, I think one of the best connections that we can make right now to just start somewhere, we had that before, right, is really between what is more sustainable also is good for the business, right? And what's good for the user who want more sustainability is in the end good for the business. Plus, a thing that we've discovered is a rule of thumb in digital. If it's more costly, it's usually less sustainable. So by being more sustainable, you can save costs. And if you build the argument around that, you won't get the systemic change, but it's kind of like a step in the right direction.
Yes. I wanted to ask you about that, Max, because the motivation that Nick, for example, said was like leadership, but I think you took the step forward first than them. Well, at least that's what I understood from the interview we had, and you were like, okay, I cannot change this enormous company, even if if you were the CEO. So what you did was that experiment. So what was not your personal motivation, or just maybe a little part of personal motivation, but how through storytelling, that's a key word from the audience, made the case to try that green notch? I think that's a fantastic example of someone. I'm not saying you're small, but we are just small gears in the big machinery, and you did very, very well in that case?
It is personal motivation, right? What I said before is the thing was the initiative that we were working on was never framed around sustainability. So the business never had this goal of being more sustainable. It was reduce returns. And if you have an opportunity like that, I think just like bottom up, you have to jump on that, right? And then you have to think about, okay, what behavioral patterns can we use to drive sustainability, and probably not even frame it around that, right? So for a long time in this initiative, we weren't even talking about like this is a sustainability initiative because it was a reducing returns initiative, and you could tie it to business impact very well. And sustainability was kind of like the main driver of the behavioral pattern that we were employing, but in the official storytelling, it was just a nice side effect, which is a little bit sad, but it's probably an approach that you have to go with right now to kind of like have this little show, don't tell approaches, just like show them like, hey, this is more sustainable. It also makes more money. Maybe there's more patterns like that. But I'm also trying to tackle that from more of a top-down perspective, but by just really closely collaborating with the ESG department that we have, with the ESG manager that we have, because there's also a list of global initiatives, and we just talk about these things, try to be ambassadors for that, and advocate for trying out more of these things, making experiments, being able to prove that more sustainable solutions can also make the company more money.
Yes, totally. So thanks so much for that, Max. Stefan, I think I don't know if this is real, but or if it's just a rumor, but is Google or Alphabet and Microsoft building nuclear plants? Is that true? Okay, so just a follow-up question is like, I think consumers, as myself, big companies that are not driving the AI revolution like NVIDIA and any others, don't realize how much energy we need to run those systems. And we need so much energy that they are building nuclear plants, and nuclear plants are, I don't have any strong opinions about that. I'm in America, so I don't think we have those. So Stefan, what is your point of view on this education we need to give? I think I believe about customers, like how to make good use of these models so we don't overspend energy, and about companies that they will say like, yes, whatever it takes, right? Like just let's build whatever it takes.
Yeah, well, that's a sore subject. I mean, listen, the reality is that the amount of energy that we're going to need to power AI, to power the other big technology that's maybe has been overshadowed by AI in terms of its sexiness the last year or two, that's the digital currencies, Bitcoin. Those two technologies by themselves are going to require the amount of energy that we're currently using by a factor of 2 or 3. It's just astronomical. We cannot even begin to understand. So the investments that these large organizations are making are because of that, because they realize that they're not going to be able to support. California will not be able to provide Google with the amount of electricity that they need to be able to run the servers that they want to do, to be able to power AI that we have today. I mean, that's going to be coming in the next couple of years. So that's the challenge. Okay. But that's been happening for a while now. We have some stats that we're not going to get into all of these things, but the numbers are just too disgusting to even bring up right now, and they're constantly changing. So if we think we can predict, whoever says they can predict with certainty what the energy requirements are going to be in the next couple of years is flat out wrong. That's my perspective, right? But this is where we have to create awareness. We have to build. And we have to build responsibility, and we have to fight against greenwashing. So what we're talking about here is giving people frameworks and models to be able to make steps towards a systemic change, like Max brought up, right? But you can't go from beginning to end in overnight. You're going to have to go step by step, right? So you're not going to be able to become carbon neutral if you're making cars. BMW is not going to be able to go carbon neutral unless they pay with offsets. That's not a solution. And that's the problem with, for example, big banks, which say, oh, we're carbon neutral, or we're net positive. Well, it's a joke because, first of all, they're not making anything. All their products are digital. The only impact on the environment, and I'm not saying that it's not big, it's a lot, but the impact on the environment is their human resources, right? Their buildings and their IT, right? Which is still a huge amount, but they're not putting out physical products in the world every year, right? Except for their, let's say, marketing materials and checkbooks or something. I'm being a little facetious here. So when they were telling me 10, 12 years ago that we're carbon neutral, I was, it makes me sick almost, right? Because that's pure and unadulterated greenwashing, right? So we need to push back on it. Okay? So it's about awareness. It's about education. We're trying to put our money where our mouth is. We're developing courses that will help educate people on a couple different things. If you're a company that's making physical products, we talked about starting with the SDGs. We also continued, and we have our own framework that we use, which is based on these 4 horizons, are starting with, to Max's point, you're starting with not necessarily calling out, oh, this is a sustainable initiative. It's an initiative to create more efficiencies, for example, in the company, reducing waste, reducing energy, reducing water usage, right? So reducing those raw materials, or making the processes more efficient so you can do something more efficiently, create a product in less time, right? Those are the kinds of things. Those are the starting point. And what we should be moving towards in that we have these 4 sort of horizons that we look at. We go from optimization. The ultimate goal should be regeneration. So we're, and this is a little bit visionary, but that's how we need to be putting things forward, is we need to be thinking of leaving the earth a little bit better than what it was when we first came into it, right? So that's how I would like to end today.
Yeah, the problem. Nuclear is green. Okay, that's why they're going there. It is greener. If you look at Europe, France has a lower carbon intensity than the UK, mainly because they've got nuclear power, and the UK doesn't. So, and that's why all the big Amazon and others, cloud operators, in a way, are moving to nuclear. They need lots of power and lots of water. They are hungry.
Yes.
Yeah, but to Nick's point, Diego, he talked about it before. We're looking at the cost of renewable energy sources, right? And those are potentially, if we were to give them the same amount of incentives that big oil got in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? To certain degrees, they're still getting them in certain states in the United States, right? They would be a lot cheaper, right? They have gotten them through the somewhat because of the U.S., the Green New Deal, but we're still not on par in comparison to what the fossil fuel industry have gotten over the years. We still have an oligarchy with OPEC that's artificially increasing and decreasing the price of oil because they can't, right? And until we stop that, and until we make them irrelevant, the bigger business model will not change. Nuclear is a bridge to where we need to go. I'd love to get to a point where that can, be phased out at some point as well. But in the short term, I think these big companies are realizing they don't have a choice, right? Basically it's a risk reduction challenge that they're trying to solve with that. Nick, I don't know if you wanted to comment here because
absolutely. I think the other thing that's probably worth bringing here, and I think you're absolutely right. I think the punchline is it's risk reduction, right? So politicians have, unless they do kind of strange, boomerang things like we've recently seen, roughly speaking, politicians have certainly in the Western liberal democracies, 5 to 10 year span of any kind of power or influence. I acknowledge the fact that there are places in the world where people stay in power for 30 years, but a politician has a fairly limited power period. Corporates are slightly different because they typically owned by pension funds. Pension funds think in 50 years plus, politicians think in about 5 years. And so I do think there is a really interesting point here, which is where if the corporates have the right incentives and behave in the right way, then actually they have more of an opportunity to affect systemic change than perhaps politicians do. Because as we've just seen, for example, in the US, like loads of crazy decisions, putting out the Paris Accords, then they're put back in, and no doubt will come back. The US will come back out of those arrangements for the second time. So I think that when it comes to SMRs, so the small modular reactors that we're talking about specifically to this point, if we take away the point about carbon versus the kind of the piece around nuclear waste, which is an interesting debate, and I don't have an opinion on it actually. What is really interesting is that the SMRs provide a reliable medium to long term source of electricity that is not vulnerable to fluctuations in the global energy market. Whereas, of course, what we've seen with the political instability is that the price of oil goes like this. You have a pandemic, right? Everyone stops flying, everyone stops driving, the price of oil collapses, and the metaphorical and literal engine of our economies just simply stalls, right? So I think when it comes to SMRs, that if you can get over the nuclear waste piece, which is you have to kind of like hold your tongue or bite your tongue or hold your nose or whatever you need to do, then I can see there is a really interesting piece here, and hopefully it also leads to the democratization of energy, right? So if every small town in the UK has a small modular reactor outside it, then we reduce carbon and we also create autonomy, and it becomes a much more local piece, which I think is very crucial, and it partly relates back to my previous comment about how the price of energy is calculated in the UK and probably in most other countries. I'm not aware of the nuances there.
Okay, thank you so much. So I want to speak now. I'm not sure if we are the right panel to speak about inclusive representation in design, but I want to speak about that a little. So Nikos, Max, it is important that, well, this is the quote from Sarah Merlin that says, we need to make sure that we are reflective of the actual audience and not just a small subset. And I would like to hear from you first, Max, because you work in fashion, e-commerce, which ethically sustainable, in sustainability is like, I don't know, is if gray or really, really, really dark on how they can impact people, ethics, and beyond. So how do you ensure that your designs are inclusive and representative of the diverse users? And this time I want to speak about the customers you have, because you are building the directly interface of the user that the users use, right? You're not working B2B, you're working B2C.
We're doing B2C, but I've also done B2B before. But that actually doesn't matter, because in the end, in my opinion, so the very first step to be able to do inclusive design is probably hire a diverse team. That is something that I always try to do. When I build design teams, I try to build really diverse teams from diverse genders, diverse geographies, vastly diverse backgrounds, just so that you get kind of like very different perspectives from the get-go. That already helps a lot. I've seen that time and again. And then if you have a diverse team that is really good at designing things, in the end, it all really comes down to research, right? I'm a researcher. I'm a scientist, and do proper personas. Very few companies are working with personas that actually deserve the name persona. But if you get your personas right, everything should already be in there. If you have significant portions of your target group that need inclusive design, that need accessible design, it should already be in your personas, and it should already be implicit in everything, right? Now, of course, that almost never the reality, which is why we need things like the European Accessibility Act to force people who don't do proper research to now slap some band-aids on the digital products to make them more accessible. But what I usually try to do is, I can't even judge like how effective it is, but I guess it's more effective than if you do it not. Hire diverse teams and just do a lot and proper research.
Okay, just for context, Max says that he's a scientist because he has a PhD in what? Can you remind me?
In computer science.
In computer science, yes.
Yeah, I'm not
Yes,
even.
you said
I'm
that
not
at the beginning.
designer.
I'm so sorry.
I don't know what I'm doing here. But yeah, even without the PhD, I would
Okay.
be a scientist. But yeah. So I have a lot of love for research and doing research properly. And if you do research properly, that already takes away a lot of the otherwise extra effort that you would have to put into inclusivity.
Okay, so Nikos, do you have a point of view about whether Max said or what I asked? If not, I have a question about sustainability and sustainable
I'll
practices.
continue that if that's okay. We primarily work in the UK public sector and healthcare sector, not in fashion, but in public and healthcare sector, where we can only design and build inclusive services. Okay, for example, renewing a passport, you cannot exclude people. Okay, or booking a doctor's appointment or doing any public service. By definition, we need to be inclusive. Accessibility and inclusion, slightly two different things. I see accessibility as the thing that you build needs to be accessible. It's tech in there, the guidelines. Inclusive design, however, and I agree with you, Max, there's a lot to do with research, and we follow the Equalities Act in the UK. When we research for any of these services, we need to extend across people with different protected, what it's called in the UK, protected characteristics, which could be gender, religion, sexual orientation, all of these things, as well as people across what we call the digital inclusion scale. We cannot exclude anyone. So our research and design is specifically, we make specific efforts to include anyone who may potentially be using the service, whether wherever they are or whatever their characteristics are. And recently, especially with AI, we've started using what we call harms workshops, as in what is the potential harm of the thing that we're building. So we design that out and also design out any unintended consequences. But I'm bringing AI in. With or without AI, we always focus on people being able to access our services. And that, I guess, is specific to our clients because it's public sector. In the commercial sector, you may take a different route, but not in the public sector.
Just for
I had
context,
an internet hiccup.
Nikos works for the.
I just want to say I had an internet hiccup. I maybe missed the first minute of what Nikos.
It was awesome.
So,
Yes.
it was about, we primarily work with public sector. So you get passport, book a doctor's appointment, register deaths in the UK, things that by definition, we cannot exclude anyone. It's not it's not an option for someone to say, oh, I'm going to get a passport, or I'll go to another company to get a passport. That's the service. They need to be able to use it.
Yeah, that's indeed slightly different for e-commerce in the private sector. But I mean, even there, you have the studies that show that more accessible, more inclusive design is usually also better for business. You just have to get people to actually believe that.
Okay, so we are almost in time, and this is my last question. Any of you can answer. So it's about, I know it's a balance and it depends, but from your point of view, not your companies, not your team, like how do you balance innovation and responsibility? Because it's easy to go and use new technologies that you're not aware of the sources, of the resources they are using. And I'm not speaking only about AI models taking knowledge from the internet, but like if we have a cell phone, are we sure where all the materials come from? And do we care? Like sometimes I care, but you're so disconnected from the sources. I will say this, like the pain of the workers that you are not really aware. So anyone wants to say something about innovation versus responsibility?
I can start just to kind of circle back to the very first of, what we do is we focus on solving problems, right? We solve problems through the power of design and innovation, right? And at the end of the day, though, we have to do it by striking a balance between the things that we do and the point that Nico said, the unintended consequences. We can no longer allow kind of oh, well, I didn't know what the consequences would be. We can't afford it. We can't allow ourselves to play, that concept of, it's okay, it's not my responsibility, right? The reality is that when it comes to design innovation, right, that's at the very beginning of the process. So we know from studies that have been validated time and time again that 80% of the impact of a product or a service or an experience, okay, is from a sustainability perspective, from an energy use perspective, from a materiality, is determined in the initial 20% of the product development process. The initial 20% is where design and innovation resides, pure and simple. You could argue R&D as well. Again, we can belabor that point, but that's front-end innovation, right? So if we're not responsible, if we don't incorporate and take responsibility for the sustainability, for the circularity of anything that we make today, then it's our fault at the end of the day. So we cannot afford to do that anymore. It's not good enough to just say, well, I don't know, or throw it over the fence to the engineering team or the manufacturing team or whoever is downstream from where we operate to figure out the problem. That's no longer good enough. I also believe that designers have a certain mind frame, have a thought process. Their brain works differently, and that allows us to look at the bigger system, the system as a whole, and solve what we call wicked problems. So if we have the opportunity and we are given a seat at the table in these large organizations that we're in today, we should be taking responsibility. It's that good old overused term from Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility, right? So I'll stop there, but that's kind of what I think that we should be striving for is a balance between what we can do and the responsibility that we have as an organization that actually makes new stuff to kind of impact the entire of the organization that we work for.
I will use another overused word, and it's empathy. But sometimes it feels like empathy, it's voice. Like what does that mean, right? Like I'm empathetic only to the things that I know and I'm aware of. But how can you do your research? Where and when do you care? Like you actually care. Like, and I'm speaking. You said something about the elections in the U.S. Like the U.S. companies are working for their employees' rights, but do they care about the cars that come from Mexico that were built in China and how they are going in the U.S. without respecting? And we don't know if they are respecting human rights everywhere. But empathy, how do you build that muscle? Anyone wants to go in that direction?
If I can just, I'll come to that in what Stefan was saying. As designers, we are perfectly placed. We understand end-to-end services. We map them, okay? As you're saying, we're researching user needs and we prototype. Who best to be at that early 20%, as you were saying, Stefan, that defines the solution, the thing, whether it's physical or not, that we're building. And to your question, Diego, it is a muscle. And I think, especially irrespective of what your background is, but when you're coming into design, and in my experience, everyone, in design, generally design that I met, it is always all about the user. Okay. We need to balance that with being also about the business, by the way. Okay. But since to your question, that is, and actually people are quite passionate about it. I haven't met any designers that are not passionate about the users.
Yes, agreed. Nick or Max, any thoughts about that? We are almost in time. So
Yeah,
you
I'll
can give
be-
your closing thoughts.
Let me be super quick. So I think, I think firstly, not all innovation is the same, right? So there are various different models about how we can, compare, for example, disruptive innovation versus incremental innovation. So I think in a way, I think innovation is one of these dreadful words that we all use it and none of us really know what it means. I actually do think that as designers and the further I get through my career, I think in many ways, the more I think design is actually about facilitation, right? So actually, I don't go into a room and tell people what to think. What I do is I try and gather senior stakeholders and people who are connected to the future products or services that I'm designing, and I try and work out how to tease that out from them. And that's a very weird role, right? It's sort of part like Pied Piper, part DJ, part all sorts of kind of. It's a strange thing to do. And I suppose my point here is that it's a very important role. And whilst absolutely we have to counterbalance with responsibility and to understand our consequences and stuff, I would be scared if that slightly eccentric spark, if you like, was kind of suppressed, right? You need the Mavericks, you need the Steve Jobs to hold up the multi-button device and say, I'm going to take all your buttons away and you're going to fall in love with it. And here's a thing called an iPod. And when everyone told him that he was a lunatic and he took the genius design route and created the most amazing product. So I suppose I do think it's absolutely crucial to be responsible and to understand consequences and so on and so forth. But let's not do it at the cost of our passion and our drive and all of those things. Because otherwise, we'll make a bunch of very similar grey stuff that ticks loads of boxes. And actually, you need the stuff that sits outside the boundaries as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick. Before you give us your closing thoughts, Max, I think Stefan has a hard stop.
I do have a hard stop, and my meeting is about to start. So maybe a 10 seconds or 20 second to the end, if that's okay.
Okay, go ahead. Everyone can stay for 2 minutes more so we can hear Max's closing thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure to connect with all of you. And Max, Nick, Nico, I will connect with you individually offline and continue the conversation. It's been a pleasure. I put in some information regarding our upcoming masterclass that's focusing on just this subject for people that want to find out more. It's in the chat. So thank you for your time. We could speak for another 2 hours on this subject. So Diego, thank you for bringing us together. I'm looking forward to seeing the recording.
Thank you so much, Stefan. See you later.
Great to meet you, Stefan.
Bye-bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Max. And then Nikos, so we can close this up.
Closing thoughts. So we basically had two questions, right? The first one was on innovation versus responsibility, and then the second one was on empathy, right?
Yes.
So innovation versus responsibility, I fully agree with everything that has been said, right? So you just need some kind of awareness. And I believe we as designers need to be able to do some due diligence before we just jump into new technologies and do some stuff that is potentially hurtful to certain target groups, right? I mean, most of the technologies and platforms that I haven't used at some point in my career, basically, we didn't because there was ethical issues, but they were always around data privacy. Because when it comes to data privacy, especially because of the GDPR, the due diligence is very hard. I think we need equally hard due diligence on social impact. So you need to think about, if I'm going to do this thing now, if I'm going to design this thing, what's the social impact? Should I really do this? And if you can answer the question early, then just don't do it. But sometimes you just don't know. And then you have to plunge into that, right? And just test and learn and do prototypes and maybe discover the social impact or ethical implications on the way. And then you can still hit a stop button, because you can never know everything beforehand, right? So you have to innovate, and sometimes it might not seem responsible, but it's probably the right choice. So you should never be afraid of that. I guess it's a difficult topic. Empathy.
It is.
And then empathy. It's the better you are at empathy, the better you are probably at the kind of due diligence. And how you build empathy is really just have exposure to humans, right?
Yes.
First time I had to build empathy was when the very moment that I slipped into this whole design and UX world was I was a computer science student, and I was basically a programmer. I was working at an institute in Zurich where I studied, and I did user interfaces. I had not the first clue about user interfaces. I thought I was really great at user interfaces because I was really great at programming. And then I had to do a user study with my user interfaces, and I saw people struggling so much with my user interface. I was like, okay, maybe I'm really shit at making user interfaces. This feels horrible. This might be a really interesting field to go into. And you just have to do that over and over and over for years. And then it's a muscle that you can train, but that's the cool thing, right?
Yes. And about empathy and this muscle, I think one of the key things that, and this is for the people in the US, is learn another language. It's not only about traveling, it's about learning how others communicate in their own language. Like I'm sure if we hear Max speaking in German, he will say more things, more fluently, more eloquently. I'm not saying your English is bad. I'm just saying like your German is perfect, as well as Nico's Greek. And Nick, do you speak another language?
I speak pretty bad French and even worse Hindi, so not really, no.
But still, you understand that. So that's a muscle you need to work on. Nikos, any closing thoughts?
The only thing I want to add is that it's especially around sustainability. Digital is physical, okay? So we should always be aware of that when we build digital products and services. It all has a physical impact and an environmental impact. So just to be aware of that when we build up beautiful products and services.
Okay, thank you so much. Nick, you want to say something else before we close this?
Good, just to thank you all for your time. I really enjoyed this.
Guys, so thank you so much for...
Thank you.
Can we float some reading tips? I always find reading tips very important. So I've already mentioned Mike Montero, Ruined by Design. That's fantastic. Then I believe Nikos posted in the chat a book on systems thinking already. And in terms of ethical design and sustainable design, I would also very highly recommend Tim Frick's Design for Sustainability, because that has like a lot of really practical everyday tips. Really great. And then, of course, Don Norman's Design for a Better World.
Okay, thank you so
Read
much.
that stuff.
Anybody else wants to share another book recommendation?
Just put Engineering by Joe McLeod. Really, really interesting.
Okay, to the audience, I recommend you reach out to Nick. He's amazing. He knows a lot of things. He's a family man. He knows what he's speaking. Nikos works for I don't know if he works for or with the UK government. So he knows a lot about compliance, laws, accessibility, a ton of stuff. And Max, he's German. He speaks in English and lives in Barcelona and knows a ton of things. And I think his point of view is really unique because one, he's a scientist. He comes from computer science, and he has like this really, really cool mix of knowledge and how he says the things. He's really, really a good guy. So thank you guys. Well, and Stefan that left before. So thank you guys so much for this. I will share the recording and everything. So I will stop the recording right now. So